Hey everybody, Joe Pizar here with the Whiskey Rebellion Festival, and I am super stoked. We are going to be bringing the festival back this year on July 10th. It'll be a one-day festival, but we will still have all of the components that make the Whiskey Rebellion Festival special. One of the key components to our festival is our street theater. Clay Kilgore, our the head of history in Washington County, if you will, has been the key figure with his partner Brant Garda since the beginning of the festival, making street theater happen. Last year, the National Road Heritage Corridor, Donna Holdorf, as well as DCNR sponsored us to film our street theater because we couldn't have a festival. Now, we've held off on letting that content out, so you guys have a special treat today, which will prime you to see what you're in store for on July 10th. So, Clay, I want to ask you a couple of questions. On coming up, we have last year's street theater performance. What could they expect out of what they are to watch here in a minute?
I mean, it's a digital table read, so everybody, zoomed in and did it as we would when we first start practicing. We just sit around a table and we read it. So it was a digital table read with costumes, and in between that, in between the scenes, Brant and myself are there to kind of give some behind-the-scenes notes of why we do certain things that we do and how we tell the story.
Sweet. Well, now this year is going to be back on, like we said, on July 10th. You can come and enjoy our historic street theater, which has really gained a life of its own. Down in Madeline's Garden at the Lemoyne Center, all day we'll be having different performances. Can you tell us what we can expect on July 10th from the Street Theater group as they come back out into the world?
We are bringing something new. We're bringing a whole new script, things that people haven't seen before. Maybe revisiting some old scripts, but basically it's all new, and we're excited about it. I think people are going to see some stuff that they're not used to. They're going to see an amazing interaction between David Bradford and Alexandra Hamilton that I am just excited as heck about.
I am too. So enjoy the performance to come. I know the folks put a great deal of time in it. We very much thank our sponsors, the National Road Heritage Corridor, Donna, as well as DCNR for sponsoring this video. And we expect to see everybody on July 10th at the Whiskey Rebellion Festival, whiskeyrebellionfestival.com. And it's good to be back, man.
And also visit the Bradford House Facebook page, the Whiskey Rebellion Festival Facebook page, as there's always great content on both of those.
Thank you. Like, share, and follow, and we'll see you July 10th.
Out beyond the hills in western Pennsylvania, good men support their families on whiskey from the grain. Ain't never had no money, ain't never had the need. Round and round the years we go, from harvest back to sea. But a cold wind is blowing and the taxman drawing near.
Hello and welcome to Whiskey Rebellion 2020 and the Street Theatre Troupe's production of Whiskey Rebellion history. I'm Brant Garda and this is Clay Kilgore. We are the co-authors and directors of the Whiskey Rebellion Street Theater. This year we decided it would be good to present to you kind of a behind-the-scenes look at Whiskey Rebellion's Street Theater production. Given the circumstances, we thought it would be best to do a little bit of a different take on what we would otherwise do on the street.
It's actually, oddly enough, this is actually the 10th anniversary. We just realized that as we were putting this together, of the Street Theater. The first year we did the Whiskey Rebellion Festival, we didn't have street theater. It was just kind of some reenactors stationed around. But the second year we did I won't even call it street theater, it was reenacting. We did did our first tarn feathering. We did a duel and a couple other things that were kind of disjointed. And then as it progressed from year to year, they got a little more elaborate to the point where we actually brought actors in to play some of the parts. We started telling the stories of David Bradford and John Holcroft and even Alexander Hamilton and George Washington. And so we got to the point where we went from just reenactors spouting off stuff to writing some outlines to actually full-on scripts. And we started out doing these are the first scripts here. This is what they looked like. This is a napkin from the Union Grill here in Washington. We would just sit around at the bar and throw out ideas, drink a lot, and come up with what we were going to do. And so this year, we can't do the street theater. Unfortunately, the festival had to be postponed, and so we're not able to do it. And we just thought this would be a great way, kind of a behind the scenes look at what we do, why we tell some of the stories that we do, and to see a table read.
Which is actually interesting in that we are filming right now in the room where we now write the scripts. We've graduated from the Union Grill to my home study where we sip obviously copious amounts of bourbon and honestly practice some of the choreography and the blocking that we'll do on the street, to the point where, as a joking prop, we practiced said duel using Nerf guns in my office. So with that in mind, we wanted to give you that behind-the-scenes sense of what happens. But at the end of the day, the goal here and the goal of this entire troupe is to tell the story of the Whiskey Rebellion and to convey the history that is so significant to Washington County's growth and development and its role in the building of the United States. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Clay to give kind of the background of where we're going with this year's script, and we can go ahead and kick off the show.
Every year we try to do a different theme to try to cover some of the more important subjects of the rebellion, to cover some of the themes of the rebellion. We have had years where we focused more on the East, Hamilton and Washington and Edmund Randolph. We've had years where we focus more here in the West, and that's this year. We wanted to tell the story of the confrontations that occurred here on the frontier between farmers, because not every farmer was for the rebellion. There were some that were against it, and we wanted to show some of that conflict. The thing that we have to do, though, with this with the street theater is we've got 1 day to tell 4 years of history. And so we do take some liberties with the history. We'll maybe combine a few things, adjust the timeline a little bit, and add in some characters that maybe are made up of 3 or 4 historical characters, and we'll kind of form that into one person to more easily tell the story over the course of the day. And so when you watch these, whether it's the street theater or watch the table read today, take away from it that we're really trying to get the theme of the rebellion across. Not everything is 100% accurate. We have to take some of those liberties just to be able to do that. What is great is that our actors are able to take that history. They've put a voice to these people that haven't had a voice for 200 years. They've done the research on their own, and they're able to take those characters and over the course of the day really portray them and take the stories and the lines that we write and make it into what it really is, and that's a history-telling event.
And one very important thing to recognize here is that they are doing this voluntarily. This is an entirely volunteer cast and crew that is making this happen every year. So please acknowledge as you watch this that the talent you're seeing is doing this of their own volition and out of a passion for some combination of their craft and the history of Washington County.
And so the first scene that we're going to do, this is something that really didn't occur. This particular event didn't happen. We used it to show some of the confrontations that were taking place between people like Hugh Henry Breckinridge, David Bradford, and farmers that were Federalists and farmers that were anti-Federalist. And so we have a confrontation that takes place. I don't know if we even gave it a town. It might have been the Bassettown. I don't know if we even said.
Bassettown.
Okay, so on the streets of Bassettown, which is present-day Washington, PA. And so this is a confrontation that we put together of different events to show what might have happened when Hugh Henry Breckinridge was making an announcement about the excise tax.
All right, so with that, please sit back and enjoy as we take you back to 1794 as the actors put you on the street with Hugh Henry Breckinridge. Enjoy.
Hugh Henry Breckinridge stepped up on a platform one day in 1794, flanked by tax collector Simon Alden and U.S. Marshal David Lennox. Among the crowd that day were whiskey rebels, Alexander Cunning, John Holcroft, and me, Joseph Crispin. Unfortunately, I died that day as a result of what this brought about. Breckinridge began reading the following proclamation.
It must yield a painful reflection to all real admirers of a representative government that the only fair experiment of its superior advantages should be challenged by outrage on private property and a public opposition to the legitimate voice of the country. Oh, it need hardly be mentioned that I refer to the, although morally correct, but illegal riotous act.
Perhaps you should keep this simple. I see we are dealing with the uneducated masses out here.
Yes, Mr. Brackenridge. Mr. Alden is right. Do be quick.
Indeed, the odor here is unbearable. These people mustn't have bathed in years.
It need hardly be mentioned that I refer to the, although morally correct, but illegal riotous acts that have occurred here in this Western land. They say that they are in favor
Do they
of
even have soap here? Smell!
Ah, forget the smell. I like what I see.
I step between them to intervene, to protect my wife. Don't you dare touch her, Lennox.
Don't you dare touch me, peasant.
Marshal Lennox, please control yourself. Remember that these are good people. We must lead them by example. You threaten to destroy the very nature of this democratic society with this protest.
Excuse me, but can you read till you have no breath?
We have no interest in surrendering our livelihoods to the East. You are wasting your time.
And risking your well-being?
Joseph, please. We don't have to go that far.
Yeah, surely we can negotiate a position that is amenable to everyone.
Says the wishy-washy federalist lackey, standing idly by, watching the likes of him try to ruin my life and steal my wife.
Don't lump me into the likes of that.
You two are completely out of order.
Guards, remove these men from the street.
The lieutenant in command ordered the advance of the guard on the crowd.
Gentlemen, please. We aren't here seeking confrontation.
What do you mean? That's exactly what we're here for. After getting Sarah out of the way, I quickly turned toward the troops. My hand got caught in the strap of my satchel. Marshal Lennox must have thought I was pulling a pistol. He yelled, "Gun!" and shot. Out of reflex, the entire federal line opened fire upon me. The last thing I remember was a sting of musket balls upon me. Mr. Huff and I fell where we stood.
You bastards!
Alexandra began to advance on the guards. They positioned for hand-to-hand combat. Before they could clash, John Holcroft jumped between them.
Wait! Have we not seen enough bloodshed?
For God's sake, these men weren't even armed!
Lieutenant, we will take our leave. But please, let us remove our brothers from the street.
Very well.
Now, Marshal, to work.
So see at the end of that scene, there were federal troops that led off some of the men. There actually was a small contingent of federal troops in this region. They were stationed at Fort Fayette in Pittsburgh. They were basically left behind by General Anthony Wayne when he was sent to the Ohio Territory to fight the Native Americans. It was a small garrison of troops left. But that was the argument of the national government, that they did have troops there to help protect the citizens of the frontier. But to be fair, Wayne's going to fight Native Americans in Ohio, the Ohio Territory. I'm guessing he didn't leave his best troops behind. They were probably some of the men he thought, you guys just stay here and protect the fort. But there was a contingent here. The next scene we wanted to get into was about funerals, and I'll just kind of let Brant tell a little bit what we were thinking with that.
Yeah, so our goal with this one was to convey how a funeral would have occurred in this area. Obviously, there were multiple methods or liturgies or approaches to a funeral at the time, but the gist of it being that in such a small community and in such a tight-knit community out here on the frontier, it would have been a fairly public affair, or a more public affair, especially when a prominent figure in the community or a more noted figure in the community passed away. There would have been something to the tune of a procession, a more public remembrance of the individual who passed away. And really, for our purposes in telling this story, it was important to convey that it would have been especially public for someone who laid down their life for that community.
Now, to be fair, I do want to point out, just as people are watching this, Joseph Crispin is not an actual historical figure. We actually pulled him together out of 3 or 4 other people and different stories to kind of make one character. But some of the other ones that are in here, David Bradford, Elizabeth Bradford, John Holcroft, Alexander Cunning, Hugh Henry Breckenridge, are true figures.
And on the other side, Marshal David Lennox as well.
Yeah, so, David Lennox, that's true. They are true figures of the rebellion.
With that, please sit back and enjoy scene 2.
My friends, we have gathered here today to mourn the loss of our dear friend and neighbor, Joseph Crispin. Joseph was a good man and a fine husband. He was a conscientious provider for his family, both through his well-run farm and his productive still. I dare say Mr. Crispin would have had many years of life left, years in which his contributions to this community would no doubt have grown richer, had the events of today not unfolded as they did. His death should be a lesson to you all that as we go through these perilous times, it is best to act with prudence and diplomacy. Their path of violence only begets further violence. So I implore you to...
This is not a time for politics, Mr. Brackenridge.
It is a time to remember all the good he did alongside us.
I'm not a preacher, but I say we raise our glass to honor the memory of our friend. A friend killed while standing up to tyranny.
Ugh, you backward fools! Honoring this scum! He dared to defy our government in Philadelphia.
Why are you even here, Marshal?
Well, someone needs to ensure these proceedings are peaceful. And to make sure the grieving widow fares well.
She is well taken care of, I assure you.
Why don't you let us mourn our friend in peace?
I agree, Marshal. A funeral is hardly the place.
Oh, even for a rabble-rouser who doesn't deserve such respect?
Here on the frontier, sir, we respect those who stood up for something in which they believe.
Which is true of everyone out here, Mr. Bradford, on both sides of the question at hand.
Oh, for the love of God, Breckenridge, would you please, for once, take a stand?
We are all brothers and sisters in the common cause of liberty, striving to better our new nation, each in his own way,
And we all know you love the sound of your own voice, but come to the point, man.
I have been more than clear that this is a moral...
For the love of God, could you imbeciles please shut up?
Marshal, we are trying to have a civil discussion.
And we are in the middle
And we what, woman? Do you not hear yourselves? You are no better than those savages who run about in these woods.
You dare speak so in the midst of funeral proceedings?
Shouldn't you be burning him on a pyre instead?
Alexander Cunning angrily shoved Marshal Lennox away from the mourners.
How dare you lay your filthy hands on me? Trash! Don't you ever put your hands on me.
Holcroft began to pull his knife from its sheath.
You will have more than hands laid on you. if you do not leave, sir, now.
And Marshal Lennox whips out his gun.
Holcroft, I have no problem putting 3 bodies in the ground.
Don't you dare threaten my husband.
Oh, maybe you'd like to join him and make it 4.
Marshal! While I sympathize with your cause, perhaps it's best you leave before there is further violence.
Huh. I see it takes some threatening a woman for you to stand your ground. Against your own neighbors, no less.
David, this time Mr. Brackenridge is right.
This time?
Would you please escort the marshal from here? You have said your piece and then some. We can proceed without you.
At Brackenridge's urging, Marshal Lennox reluctantly backed away from the crowd. His gun trained on Joan Holcroft the entire time.
Let's raise our glasses to Joseph Crispin. Let his death be a lesson to all of us. Indeed.
So that scene gives you an idea of what funerals would be. We threw a little confrontation in there, as well, just to show the fighting between the farmers and people like Hugh Henry Breckenridge that were kind of straddling the line of being for the rebellion but against the rebellion at the same time. And so every year, we show conflict a lot because that's what a lot of the rebellion was. And so we have these figures like John and Rachel Holcroft and David and Elizabeth Bradford. And we show them in their part in the rebellion, but we really wanted this year to take the time to kind of give you a look at what they were like in their personal lives. What would their conversations about the rebellion would have been like in their own homes, in their bedrooms, one-on-one? What would it have been? And that's what this next scene is really trying to do.
Yeah, and that includes, in the cases of Marshal David Lennox and the fictional Sarah Crispin, the interaction between those who had come out here from the East and those who were living here in the West. One important historical point we wanted to convey with that was Marshal Lennox, for example, really didn't think too highly of those who lived out here on the frontier, and there was an air of arrogance that came along with his interaction with people, even, interestingly enough, as he tries to woo in this scene, Sarah Crispin.
Which didn't happen, but we used that interaction between the two to show that disdain almost for the frontier people.
Exactly. And finally, as Clay pointed out, to highlight that there were very different conversations going on in different households. The more academic aspect from the Bradfords and the more family and personally oriented interaction
Kind of more
from the
emotional
Holcrofts.
with the Holcrofts,
Exactly.
yeah, a little more emotional with them.
So with that, please sit back and enjoy scene 3. And scene 3 is a series of 3 vignettes. In this case, we wanted to do something a little different. So on the street, this would have been a series of freezes by the actors, but in this case, it'll be a series of shots. So please enjoy scene 3.
We find David and Elizabeth Bradford in their parlor, poring over documents of the week's business. David studying a map of the state, planning his work and political travels.
And after I meet with Secretary Hamilton in Philadelphia, it should only take a few days to reach Mount Vernon. There I will brief President Washington on the outcome of our negotiations.
Remember that while you are in Virginia, you should discuss the fact that distillers along the coast, including President Washington, are far less impacted by the excise than your constituents.
Very good point. Thank you. Do you think he and Martha would be willing to introduce me to other producers in the area while I'm around?
In all my years of knowing her, she has never been one to eschew common courtesies.
Excellent. And could you, my dear, send a letter informing her of my impending visit?
I will, but I cannot guarantee that it will arrive before you. The Postal Service is not the most reliable, as you know.
Yes, indeed. Now then, from Virginia, I will proceed west through Cumberland to take measures of their stance on the excise. I think I'll then travel through Western Virginia and turn north, returning to the area through Addis. Elizabeth? Elizabeth, what is your opinion? Elizabeth, I hope you realize that I rely on your input in these matters.
I do, yes. But this is about more than just our businesses. Do you honestly think this ends favorably for you? For any of us? I do not.
Ms. Elizabeth, I understand what you're saying, but we must focus on the task at hand and the results we can deliver now.
But the people will not always have us here to deliver those results. David, there is no way this affair ends with us calling this place our home.
There's no reason to assume that, Elizabeth. Besides, if we were to leave now, mob mentality would prevail. The Holcrofts of the frontier would go off the hooks.
Which is why we need to plan for the impact on the community when you're not here to speak for them.
Meanwhile, in their living room across town, there are many children finally asleep. The Holcrofts were having their own discussion, one significantly more spirited than the Bradford's more academic debate.
Think, think, think. All Bradford does is think and plan. We need to do. We need to do more than just react.
Rachel, I've tried to prevent violence from the outset, and 2 men died. I barely restrained myself at one of their funerals. I beg you, do not push me further in this direction.
Be that as it may, we need to create a future without the yoke of an oppressive government hanging over our family's head.
But you have no idea of the toll that takes. Remember, I've been through this before. Shay's rebellion was over a tax not too dissimilar to this one. It did not end the way we intended. In fact, many families were destroyed.
Yes, but those families were practically neighbors of John Adams, of Boston. We are people of the frontier. We endure more hardship in a day than they do in a year.
And isn't that enough? Should we really add the threat of Federalist invasion to the things our children must fear?
John, there will always be something like that to fear. King, President, Federalist.
Isolation, starvation, raids. To me, these are far more immediate concern than what's going on in Philadelphia.
No, don't you see? They are all connected and they all share one common thread.
Which is?
That what our children should fear is the day that we decide to do nothing.
So what do we do next?
You step out from behind the desk of Tom the Tinker and lead the men you have inspired.
So we fight.
So we fight.
Since these events began to unfold, Marshal Lennox made no secret of his desire to woo my wife and now widow, Crispin. Here we find him making another, bolder attempt.
Mrs. Crispin, I need to speak with you about an urgent matter. Discreetly, of course.
Oh, yes, certainly. Please, have a seat.
Well, I'll get right to it. I am, after all, a very forthright man. I would like you to consider moving east with me once all this business on the frontier is settled.
Excuse me?
It's more cosmopolitan in Philadelphia, cultured, with amenities these folks out here have never experienced, but someone such as yourself more than deserves.
Well, I am taken aback by your generous offer, but I have never lived anywhere but Bassetttown. How could you expect me to move away from my family,
I know I have caused you pain in the past. I don't wish to cause you any more. Quite the contrary. In fact, I wish to make your life better.
It occurred to Mrs. Crispin at this point that this was her perfect opportunity to play Lennox for a fool.
If what you say is true, then when would we be making this journey? Would your commission out here allow it?
As I said, soon my work here will be completed.
Well, when exactly?
My colleague, Mr. Alden, will soon be taking on a greater role, freeing me, us, to return to civilization.
Will he be announcing this soon? I will need some time to get my affairs in order.
Yes, he will be doing so any day now. A public announcement in the town square.
In that case, Marshal Lennox, you may have just found yourself a traveling companion.
From the last scene, we wanted to segue back to some of the more public impact that the Whiskey Excise and the Rebellion and the Federalist presence had on the region. With that in mind, though, we also wanted to continue conveying the more personal aspect, because remember, in scene 1, 2 people died, and their 2 widows are still being affected by the actions of federal officers. However, we wanted to make sure we also gave a more educational aspect and that we segued to some of the more economic impacts of the Whiskey Rebellion.
Because I mean that's really what this tax was about. We show the emotional side of it because it makes good street theater, but there was an economic side to it that was the major thing. I mean, when you look at the causes of the rebellion, why the farmers out here rebelled, there's a lot of different things. There was the Native American raids, there was the tariff on goods going down the Mississippi River, and there was the excise tax. The farmers were financially impacted by this tax. You have to realize that most of the farmers that are out here that are distilling aren't actually selling their product. What they're doing is trading it. I mean, it was a barter system out here in Western Pennsylvania, to the point where whiskey became more like currency than actual physical currency. And so for the government to come in and levy a tax on them to say it's going to be 7 cents a gallon, where's that 7 cents coming from? If I'm distilling it down and I'm trading it to somebody else for other goods that I need, where's that 7 cents coming from? And so a lot of the farmers out here, a majority of them would not have had that type of money or that currency to be able to pay in. And so we wanted to show that type of impact, that it wasn't just an emotional thing. Oh, the government's levying a tax on us and we don't like taxes. Oh no, the government is levying a tax on us that is going to threaten our entire livelihood, to the point where they were willing to commit treason and rebel against this national government to get their point across.
So with this scene, it gave us the perfect opportunity to take history and education about it and really put it in a blender with the emotional impact on our cast of characters to give you scene 4, which we now invite you to sit back and enjoy.
Must yield a painful reflection to all real admirers of a representative government. The only fair experiment of its superior advantages should be challenged by outrage on private property and the public opposition to the legitimate voice of the country. It need hardly be mentioned that I refer to the, although morally correct, but illegal riotous acts that have occurred here in this Western land. Forgive me, I forgot where I was, since I was so rudely interrupted the last time. I'm now here to announce and collect the excise of 7 cents per gallon of the devil's drink. Remember, this tax helps pay for your protection and...
Well, you're tongue enough for 2 sets of teeth.
And what sort of protection is it when my husband was killed over your tax?
Wayne's legions risk their lives every day on the frontier in Ohio, defending you. Have you seen any Indians here in the last 7 years, madam?
For the last 11 years, we have paid in our own blood.
Many of us split still more in the Revolution, all while the president and Congress stayed in Philadelphia.
Building the nation that allows General Wayne to fight for your protection. And your president pays his taxes. You think you shouldn't or can't? Why not simply take your grain, sell it, market, and do your duty rather than produce an abomination such as alcohol?
Our president does not need to travel over the mountains to sell his goods to pay his taxes. The journey takes over a month. The grain we farm can't be sold if it rots. It's the reason our whiskey exists.
I understand your plight, but you must understand that this excise is the law of the United States government.
The government we fought for is not the government we got.
My husband didn't risk his life alongside your President Washington to throw out one tyrant in London only to get hundreds in Philadelphia.
And your husband was buried?
He was.
Then I suppose your grain is not all that will rot.
How?
Charlie Huff, in a fit of rage, slapped Alden across the face. For a moment, he could do nothing but stand there in shock.
Guards! Take her to the pillory!
Two of Alden's guards burst into the tavern. They restrained an increasingly violent Mrs. Huff and took her to the pillory to await trial. As they left, they passed Alexander Cunning as he stepped forward once again.
What is it, Cunning?
You put Mrs. Huff in chains. Has she not suffered enough?
Apparently not. Or she wouldn't have attempted to defy the federal government or assaulted a federal officer.
We just buried her husband not 3 months ago. We did so because of federal officers.
Keep pressing me, farmer, and you'll join her.
I think not.
Cunning drew a gun on Alden, leveling it at his head.
What do you think you're doing, Cunning?
Defending the freedom I fought for in the Western militia during the war, you split-bearded, squirrel-necked fussick.
Cunning stepped forward, intent on shooting Alden, but John Holcroft stepped between them once again.
Stay that pistol. We accomplish nothing with cold-blooded murder. All we'll do is satisfy your bloodlust.
John, listen. We defend true freedom out here. And now he doesn't have his federal guard dogs to protect him. What better chance will we get?
Alden attempted to flee, but he was intercepted by Holcroft.
Don't mistake my diplomacy for mercy, Alden. Alexander, we have one Federalist. We only need one more. You see, Simon, I have a use for you.
So at the end of the last scene, we saw Simon Alden be captured by the Whiskey Rebels. Obviously, there's still another federal officer out there. So for furtherance of the plot, obviously we needed to move into what was going to happen to Marshal David Lennox. In this case, we also wanted to jump back to the interplay between East and West, the arrogance and disdain that came about from all of that.
And then, also what we wanted to touch on was Marshal Lennox's dedication. We wanted to kind of, you'll see in the scene, that he's picking up the slack where Alden has left off. And that's a very accurate thing in that he was very motivated and really when he came out here, he was dedicated to the task of handing out these writs and these summons to the farmers. He truly felt like these men have broken the law. They should be paying their taxes.
He was a Rev War vet too, so there
Rev War vet. He's kind of climbing that aristocracy ladder, as he goes up, and so he really is dedicated and believes in what Hamilton is putting in front of him. Like, these men have not paid their taxes. they have to, they have to be handed out these writs, even though they were somewhat illegal. And so he's dedicated to that. And we wanted to take that aspect, that true aspect of him, and kind of show it. And that's what this scene is really, really helping to do.
Which carried through with most of the excise officers who came out here. The one tarring and feathering that we have truly documented was of Robert Johnson in 1791.
September 1791, yeah.
Who, after recovering from his tar and feathering wounds, actually came back here to continue collecting the damn tax.
Yeah.
So there was a great deal of loyalty and perseverance on the part of the Federalists, not just on the part of the Whiskey Rebels, and we wanted to get that across in this scene. And in this case, Marshal David Lennox, despite knowing what's happened to his compatriot Simon Alden, sitting in his office having a smoke, really just contemplating next steps and next moves. So with that, enjoy scene 5.
Marshal Lennox got a note from John Neville informing him of Simon Alden's capture. He was in his office having a smoke as he reads the letter when Sarah Crispin rushed in.
How can you be sitting here smoking? Your colleague is being led away in shackles by an angry mob.
And your point is?
Obviously, they're coming for you next. I couldn't bear to see something so terrible happen to someone about whom I've come to care.
I fought in multiple wars against the finest musketmen on earth and the most brutal of savages. These people are little better than the latter. They are farmers with pitchforks, for God's sake. I assure you, we will be fine.
But David, there's no reason to take the chance. We already discussed our plans for a future together in the East. Why don't we leave now?
With Simple Simon gone, my responsibilities have only increased. I must now assume the duties of both U.S. Marshal and the excise officer.
Duties that may be rendered pointless if Bradford has his way. He's talking of raiding Pittsburgh.
Which is why I must save them from their own stupidity. I cannot allow these men to unwittingly commit treason. And they will thank me for it in the end.
Then at least let me help you. Clearly, I once stood by my neighbors in their talks of insurrection. But I see your bravery and now share your patriotic vigor. Too much blood has been spilt already. We both know this all too well. We must put an end to this violence by any means necessary.
And what do you suggest?
That we at least take the time to form a better plan of action. My father kept a small shelter where, I'm sorry to admit, he distilled spirits unseen. While its purpose was ill-intended, it is well concealed from prying eyes. You just received communications from General Neville. Let's take some time there to write him back and better coordinate our efforts.
Point well taken. My efforts must align with the general's under the current circumstances.
Then, what do you suggest?
Your father's shelter makes good sense. I suggest we take the most direct route.
The marshal began walking briskly towards the Crispin farm.
Where are you going?
You live over here. Your father's shelter is undoubtedly close by. I suggest we take the most direct route. Wouldn't you agree?
Of course, of course. But the main road was where Alden was captured. The rebels are undoubtedly prowling the area. I know a less conspicuous way.
I am a United States Marshal, damn it. I do not slink through the woods like a criminal, like those criminals.
This is no such thing. It is a commonly traveled route, just less direct and equally less obvious.
Very well. Lead the way.
Sarah Crispin left just enough distance between her and Marshal Lennox. Enough to pull a concealed pistol and place its barrel dead center in his back. Just in time for John Holcroft, David Bradford, and the other whiskey rebels to appear.
Oh, you scheming hedgehog!
Holcroft shoved Lennox back into the hands of the other rebels.
How dare you people place your hands on me? And you, Sarah Crispin, I thought you better than the rest of these.
You killed my husband, you cur! Did you honestly think I would fall for your wiles after all that? I've been planning this since the moment you pulled the trigger.
His life is forfeit, Sarah. It's in your hands.
A quick death in the streets is too merciful for him.
All right. We need to figure out what to do with him then.
Well, we have Alden too. Let's stand them up in front of a firing squad.
We just captured him. We don't need to decide his fate here and now.
John, your brother has Alden, does he not?
He does.
Have him bring him to the Black Bear Tavern. We can all meet there and choose their most fitting end.
So with this scene, we pick up with both tax collectors or federal officers being captured, which, again, wasn't really an actual historical event that took place, but for purposes of our getting the point across on the street, we decided to, we ultimately wanted to give the audience a choice of who got tarred and feathered, which you'll see in the subsequent scenes. We also decided to bring both of them to one of the taverns in then Bassettown, now Washington, where a lot of historical activity took place in reality.
So the tavern that we use, the Black Bear Tavern, we've used it a few years, was an actual tavern from Washington. It sat on Wheeling Street. And you're going to find a lot of activities during the rebellion taking place there. But taverns were your social centers of the day. In most towns in the frontier, before churches, before town halls, were taverns. You went there for your news. You went there for mail, to get updates on anything, politics of the day. Really, the most informed person in the area would have been the tavern keep.
Scary thought, right?
So taverns are going to be a place for discourse. It's where ideas are going to be traded. So we took that and said, well, if we have these two tax collectors that are captured, where are they going to meet to discuss, who's going to be tarred and feathered or what they're going to do with them? Well, what better place to do it in than in a tavern? And so when we start this scene, they're in a tavern, they've got the two tax collectors, and they're trying to decide what's going to happen with them. So I was going to say, enjoy the scene, but you've done all of them so far, so I'll leave it to you. So
I think the last thing I'd want to point out, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but the taverns at the time would be a little more politically oriented than we're used to in contemporary times, where there were Federalist-friendly taverns and Whiskey Rebel-friendly taverns. So when they bring them to the Black Bear Tavern, that's where you are. You're among friends in this case. So enjoy being among friends, and let's see what happens to Simon Alden and Marshal David Lennox.
All right, Holcroft, I present to you Marshal David Lennox and Federal Excise Officer Simon Alden. What do you suggest we do now?
I suggest we send at least one of them back to Philadelphia in a burlap sack.
Mr. Bradford, isn't that too strong a course of action?
Breckenridge, you are once again shifting your stance simply to oppose me.
No, I am taking the position that I believe history will view most favorably. You heard General Neville's speech. The cause for which you speak will be as silent as your own graves.
10 years from now, with your treacherous memory, you'll undoubtedly be writing of these events as though they were my ideal all along, regardless of the outcome.
I realize how difficult it may be to change opinion, David, even with what I think to be the best cause on my side. But that does not change our circumstances.
More importantly, your point is well taken, David. However, we have already talked about the impact of the rebellion. Murdering these two will not only irreversibly divide the community against itself, it will sentence you to the hangman's noose in Philadelphia. Have we not already paid a steep enough price?
The government comes in peace. They do not seek to be opponents to the frontier.
They would not dare hang the voice of the frontier.
You mean the firebrand of the frontier?
History will be on my side, Breckenridge, not yours. For the last time, hold your tongue.
Or we'll send you east along with them.
None of which resolves our issue. If we kill these men, it proves their point, that we are a threat to civilization.
They send civilized men to parley with us, and we string them up.
Civilized? This gentleman made advances on me within days of my husband's death, at his hands.
Then clearly he was too weak to keep you in the life to which you should be accustomed.
And clearly, this one sent a widow away in chains, all for a simple disagreement.
She assaulted me in public, for God's sake.
We can hardly call them civilized, especially since they were sent here to tax us back to the Stone Age.
Which is all the more reason to kill them?
No, not kill them. We should send them east with a message from the entire frontier.
Why do they both need to be alive to send a message?
Well, then let's just settle this now.
Dunning drew his pistol in an attempt to execute the prisoners. David Bradford grabbed his wrist to stop him.
This is not a decision that a handful of us can or should make. This affects everyone along the frontier. Therefore, everyone should have a say. Everyone should have a say.
I won't be a part of this madness. I will not hang next to you all.
With those as his parting words, Breckenridge stormed off into the night.
Let's take them to the streets and see who receives a true frontier welcome.
Throughout the course of this entire production, we've gone from the early months of 1794 in scenes 1 and 2 to the kind of the summer months of 1794, where the Whiskey Rebellion itself was really coming to a head. With our final scene, which we know always concludes with the tarring and feathering, we took the liberty this time of fast-forwarding to 1799, after the Whiskey Rebellion was over, and giving the characters, or at least some of the principal characters, an opportunity to reflect on their actions and all the things that happened leading up to, in our case, the culminating moment, the tarring and feathering itself.
So we're jumping forward to 1799, but in the scene, they're jumping back to 1794. That's one of the things that we started in the first year of the Street Theater, the second year of the festival. We started this tar and feathering. Didn't tell anybody it was going to happen. It was just kind of a, hey, look what happened at the end of the parade. And we tarred and feathered Trip Klein. And we've done it every year since then, normally tar and feathering one person. But once we tarred and feathered two. This year we wanted to make it where people had a vote, where they could choose between these two evil characters who's going to be tarred and feathered. And we make it fun for the audience, and so they can have a good time watching the tar and feathering. But realize this is a very violent event. A tar and feathering is something where you're taking hot pine tar and pouring it over somebody's head. This is a person that normally has been stripped naked, at least down to the waist. A lot of times they would take sticks with cloth on the end of them, dip it into the tar, and poke the person in sensitive areas, and torture them. Then they would pour this over top. The feathers were a form of humiliation, but it's the tar that really matters. They're going to be burnt. They're going to have burnt skin. To remove it, you would have to take a mixture of whiskey and sand and water and scrub it off. That could cause problems. And so you did have some people that died from tar and featherings, but not many. The main thing is that they were permanently scarred. And so during the Whiskey Rebellion, there were 4 people that were tarred and feathered, and they're going to carry those scars with them for the rest of their lives. So even though we try to make it fun, there is a violent side of this.
And the one fun thing we will say, insofar as we can after that description, is that the construction of our tar is primarily brought to you by chocolate syrup, but it's not gruesome, but a little bit gross in that it sits in somebody's hot garage for about a month before it gets dumped on our unfortunate victim every summer.
We have, it's chocolate syrup, it's blackstrap molasses, it's maple syrup, it's rye flour, and then it's all mixed together and then fermented in a very hot garage for a month and a half. So we'll let you enjoy, I'm going to take this one. We'll let you enjoy our final scene, which would have led on the Street Theatre to the Tar and Feather.
Those were most interesting times.
In our defense.
In the rebels' defense.
Point being, there wasn't much choice.
On that vein, I just received word that President Adams pardoned me.
Elizabeth was instrumental in that. Word is she wrote to Martha Washington directly.
Made good use of her high society relations in the East.
And for that, I cannot thank her enough.
But before we talk about the pardon, I was just thinking about this. How did you end up deciding who you tarred and feathered in '94?
What do you mean?
Well, as I recall, there were 2 men captured within a few days of each other.
The U.S. Marshal is quite the womanizer. The other, the tax collector, was a myopic stooge of Philadelphia.
Yes, but how did you choose?
Well, that day was a bit of a blur, but it went something like this.
Alexander, set the widow Huff free. She clearly committed no crime in the eyes of the people.
With pleasure, Mrs. Holcroft.
People of Bassettown, we bring you 2 traitors to the cause of liberty. We give you Marshal David Lennox and excise officer Simon Alden. Ultimately, the choice is yours. Who returns to Philadelphia in tar? And who returns with a message for His Excellency George Washington? There are 2 people here who have strong feelings on who should be tarred. Widow Crispin, state your case for tarring the Marshal.
Marshal David Lennox arrived in Bassettown, picked a fight, and murdered my husband.
And it was because of him that my husband was killed.
During his entire time here, he has shown nothing but disrespect and rudeness for our town, for our way of life. And not only that, he made untoward advances towards me.
While your sufferings are noted, Simon Alden is the one who's causing all the economic harm. For God's sakes, he's the one that's gallivanting all around the countryside collecting the damn tax.
And did you not see him insult the memory of Mrs. Huff's dead husband, even as she defended all of you to his unproposing face?
And all these are the reasons we agree to let the people decide. So who shall it be? The philandering marshal or the wind-whistling taxman? You all choose.
The crowd overwhelmingly favored tarring the man who brought the tax to their doorsteps.
Simon Alden, bring him up here. Put Lennox in the pillory. And you, Cunning, bring me the tar.
With pleasure.
All right, so that wraps it up for us. Thank you so much for tuning in and taking part in Whiskey Rebellion 2020, a very extraordinary version of it as we filmed everything both through the participation of our cast online and us doing this kind of as the digital town criers, if you will. So
we'll give you one last behind the scenes look. So most people don't really notice it, but pay attention next time you're at the Whiskey Rebellion Festival and look at the Street Theater titles, because Brant and I always, just to have a little bit of fun, throw something special in there. Like last year, the titles of the scenes were named after John Wayne movies. We've used West Wing, we used musicals, and
in bestsellers. And this year, they were actually going to be...
Yeah, this year, pay attention to the beginning of the scene titles because we decided it would be really fun in these extraordinary times to rickroll the entire audience. So the beginnings of these titles are in order. Whiskey Rebels, Never Gonna Give You Up. So with that,
one last thing. I do want to thank all our cast. I mean, they're absolutely incredible. The actors are amazing. I mean, we had actors from Virginia and LA, with joining us this time, and also a very special thanks to Alexis for the editing, the filming, and the editing of this. She has been absolutely amazing, getting us in line, making sure that we're doing things professionally because we don't normally like to do that. So we want to thank Alexis for all the help that she was with that.
Absolutely. Once again, thank you to everyone who was involved in the production and to everyone who's going to tune in and view this, and we will see you on the street at Whiskey Rebellion Festival 2021.
Here's to old time and all the tinker's men. Don't you pay that spirit tax, you'll still be short of men. You can follow me to Pittsburgh, follow me to jail. Your revenue man can follow me all the way to hell.